I used to believe I was lucky had a friend I could trust completely. But sometimes, the people closest to us aren't what they seem. And the line between friendship and betrayal can be thinner than we ever imagine. I was lucky to have a good job, a nice apartment, and especially lucky to have a friend like her. She wasn't just my colleague. She was also my neighbor, my drinking buddy, my shopping partner, and the person I turned to when life felt heavy. We'd go for lunch breaks together at work, grab cocktails after hours, or just hang out in our apartments, swapping stories and advice like sisters. She was the kind of person who always seemed to know everything about everyone. Sometimes she'd lean across the table during lunch and whisper about who was secretly dating who, or what scandal had gone down in another department. At first, I brushed it off as typical office gossip. Nothing too unusual. We all vent a little, right? But she was different. She knew too much. She spoke like she had people's secrets in her pocket. And the things she told me weren't always flattering. Still, I didn't think much of it. I mean, she was my friend. She confided in me, and I confided in her. If anything, I thought it was a sign of trust between us. Little did I know that trust was going to cost me more than I could ever imagine. It started subtly. At first, I noticed that some of my colleagues, people I had always gotten along with, began looking at me strangely. You know that look, where someone tries to smile at you but their eyes say something else entirely. Sometimes I'd catch two of them whispering as soon as I walked into the break room, only for the conversation to die instantly. I tried not to let it bother me. Workplaces can be weird, and I figured maybe I was overthinking. But the unease grew when I saw the same thing happening with a couple of my friends outside of work. Mutual acquaintances suddenly seemed distant, even cold. I couldn't connect the dots, so I convinced myself it was nothing. Meanwhile, my friend was right there beside me through it all. She'd shrug when I mentioned it, saying things like, "Don't worry, people are always talking. You're just in your head too much." I wanted to believe her. After all, she was the one person I trusted completely, my closest ally. Or so I thought. A few months later, our company announced a vacancy for a higher position. It was the kind of promotion people waited years for: better pay, more authority, real career growth. Naturally, I applied. So did my friend, along with two other colleagues. At first, everything seemed fair. Management reviewed our applications, asked about our accomplishments, and scheduled evaluations. I felt confident. I'd worked hard for years, and my track record spoke for itself. But then things started getting strange. Out of nowhere, my manager called me in to discuss some concerns. He brought up complaints that made no sense. Supposedly I'd missed deadlines, turned in sloppy work, even made unprofessional remarks. I was stunned. None of it was true. I had proof of my work, my emails, my records. But when I defended myself, he only frowned and said, "Well, I'm telling you what's being reported. If it happens again, we'll have to take action." I walked out of that meeting humiliated and confused. What reports? Who was saying these things? I felt like the ground under my feet had shifted, and for the first time, I wondered if I was the target of something I didn't yet understand. That night, I went straight to my neighbor's apartment, my so-called friend. I was shaken, embarrassed, and desperate to make sense of what had just happened. She poured me a glass of wine and listened as I spilled everything. The accusations, the threats from management, the way I felt blindsided. She frowned sympathetically, nodding at all the right moments. "That doesn't sound like you at all," she said, putting a hand on mine. "You've always been one of the most reliable people at work. Maybe it's just a mix-up. I'm sure it'll blow over." Her words calmed me, at least a little. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. She was the one person in my corner, reminding me not to spiral, telling me to just keep doing my best and let things sort themselves out. But deep down, I couldn't shake the unease. Why were people whispering? Why was management suddenly against me? And why did it feel like I was being watched, judged, and set up? Still, I clung to her support. After all, she was my friend. And when your world starts crumbling, you lean on the people you trust. Or at least you think you do. I told myself that conversation with my manager was just a bump in the road. That if I kept my head down and focused on my work, it would all pass. But instead of getting better, things only spiraled. Over the next few weeks, Little incidents kept piling up. I'd walk into a meeting only to find that the agenda had been, accidentally, sent to everyone except me. I'd overhear coworkers laughing about something, and when I asked what was so funny, the room would go silent. One time, I even found out I'd been left off an important email chain that directly affected my project, and when I asked about it, my manager looked at me like I was careless and unorganized. I began to feel like I was living in some kind of warped reality, where I was being punished for things I didn't do. The worst part? I couldn't defend myself. Whenever I tried to explain, it sounded like excuses. I knew my reputation was slipping, and the harder I tried to hold on, the worse it looked. Through it all, my friend was there. She kept saying the same soothing words. Don't stress, these things happen. Or, maybe management just has a lot on their plate. She would invite me out for drinks after work, or over to her apartment, where she'd reassure me that I was overthinking, and that people would eventually see the truth. I clung to her comfort, but in the back of my mind, a nagging thought kept resurfacing. Why did it feel like everyone around me was moving further and further away, except her? And then came the breaking point. One Friday, I was called into the office again. I thought maybe it would be a chance to clear the air, to prove myself. Instead, I was blindsided with a harsh ultimatum. If this behavior continued, they'd have no choice but to terminate me. Behavior? What behavior? I sat there in stunned silence, listening as my manager listed off complaints that sounded like they had been plucked out of thin air. Lateness I could prove never happened. Misconduct I couldn't possibly have been part of. Entire projects where I had documentation of every step. Yet somehow, I was being painted as unreliable and unprofessional. When I walked out of that meeting, I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I didn't even go back to my desk. I went straight home, where my friend once again comforted me, her face full of sympathy, telling me it wasn't the end of the world. But the thing was, it felt like the end of the world. My job had been my pride, my stability, my future. And now it was all crumbling, for reasons I couldn't even understand. I couldn't know it then, but the truth was much darker than I imagined. I thought things couldn't get worse. But they did. It was a Tuesday morning when I got the email. Please come to HR at 10 a.m. My stomach dropped instantly. Nothing good ever came from a vague HR meeting. I sat there at my desk, pretending to work while my hands trembled on the keyboard. 10 o'clock felt like it was creeping closer and closer like a storm cloud over my head. When I finally walked into the HR office, my manager was already there, along with one of the higher-ups from the department. Their faces were stern, cold even, like they'd already made up their minds about me before I'd even sat down. The meeting lasted less than 10 minutes. They listed off incidents, fabricated deadlines I'd supposedly missed, inappropriate comments I never made, client complaints I had never heard of. It was like listening to a stranger's sins being pinned onto my name. I tried to defend myself, but every word out of my mouth sounded like a desperate excuse. And then the hammer dropped. We've decided to terminate your employment effective immediately. I can't even explain the wave of emotions that hit me. Shock, humiliation, anger, and above all, confusion. I sat there, staring at them, thinking, how is this happening? What did I do to deserve this? By the time I gathered my things and walked out of that building, I felt like a ghost. Colleagues I'd worked alongside for years barely looked at me. Some avoided eye contact entirely. A few whispered, and I knew, they were talking about me. When I got home, I collapsed on my couch in tears. My friend came over within the hour, holding takeout and wine, saying all the right comforting things. They don't know what they're losing. You'll find something better. You're too good for them anyway. And I wanted to believe her. God, I needed to believe her. Because at that moment, it felt like she was the only person left in my corner. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom. Sometimes it's the only way you finally start to see what's really going on around you. Losing my job was devastating, but I refused to let it destroy me. After a few weeks of wallowing, I forced myself to update my resume, polish my portfolio, and send out applications like my life depended on it. To my surprise, things moved quickly. Within a month, I'd landed a promising offer at a slightly smaller but ambitious company. The role was better than the one I'd lost, the pay was higher, and honestly, it felt like a fresh start. For the first time in weeks, I felt hopeful again. Then, one afternoon after my training shift at the new job, I bumped into someone I hadn't expected to see. One of the colleagues who had applied for the same promotion at my old workplace. We hadn't talked since before everything fell apart, so I greeted her warmly, though she looked hesitant, almost guilty, as if she wasn't sure she should even be talking to me. After some small talk, she suddenly blurted out, "You're not the only one, you know." I blinked. "What do you mean?" She explained that after I was fired, she too had been called in for mysterious conversations with management. Out of nowhere, she was accused of serious mistakes she never made. Her record had been spotless, but suddenly she was being written up, criticized, and treated like a liability. Within weeks, she was also fired. My jaw literally dropped. And then came the kicker. The other woman who had applied for the promotion hadn't been fired, but she had been demoted. Demoted for errors she swore she never made. Her reputation in the office was now in shambles. It hit me like a truck. Out of the 4 people who applied for that promotion, 3 of us were taken down in humiliating ways. And the only one who wasn't? My friend. The one who was now proudly sitting in that shiny new office, enjoying the promotion she'd always wanted. At first, I told myself it had to be a coincidence. Maybe management was being ruthless. Maybe the company had just turned toxic. But as I stood there listening to my ex-colleague, I felt my skin prickle with unease. It didn't add up. None of it did. And for the first time, a dark thought crept into my mind, one I didn't want to admit. What if my friend hadn't just been comforting me through it all? What if she had been the reason everything happened? The conversation with my former colleague kept me awake for nights. I replayed every moment in my head, every whisper, every coincidence. Every time my friend had been right there to comfort me while my life unraveled. It gnawed at me, and I couldn't shake the suspicion that maybe, just maybe, she hadn't been my savior, but the one pulling the strings all along. I needed answers. So, I reached out to the others, the colleague who had been demoted and the one who had been fired. At first, it felt awkward. None of us had been particularly close before, and there was always that unspoken tension from competing for the same promotion. But once we sat down together at a quiet cafe, the conversation flowed fast, fueled by frustration, confusion, and a desperate need to make sense of what had happened. And the more we talked, the more everything started to fit. Each of us had been accused of things that sounded eerily similar. Unprofessional behavior, careless mistakes, gossiping behind colleagues' backs. Things that were completely out of character but strangely specific. Too specific. Then one of them said it. The thought I'd been too afraid to voice. Do you think she could have had something to do with it? The table went silent. We all knew who she meant. My friend. The only one who had walked away from this mess with a smile and a shiny new promotion. As we compared notes, the pattern became undeniable. She had been close to each of us during the competition, always offering support, always listening when we vented. And she had this habit, a dangerous one. She collected secrets. She asked probing questions and leaned in like she was your confidant. But later you'd hear fragments of those same stories twisted and retold by someone else. It wasn't just us either. The demoted colleague remembered times when other co-workers had pulled away from her after rumors spread. The fired one recalled being asked about a personal situation she had only ever shared with one person, her. The puzzle pieces clicked into place, and the picture they painted was ugly. Our so-called friend hadn't just been gossiping. She had been systematically poisoning people's reputations, feeding management and colleagues with half-truths and lies, until we were seen as liabilities instead of assets. And in the end, she cleared her own path to the promotion by burying all her competition. For a moment, we just sat there, stunned by the enormity of it. Betrayal on this level didn't even feel real. It felt like the plot of some cheap drama. But the consequences we had lived through were very real. Lost jobs, ruined reputations, shattered trust. That was the moment the shock turned into something else. Anger. If she thought she could ruin our lives and walk away without consequences, she was about to learn a very painful lesson. Once the anger set in, the 3 of us knew we couldn't just let it go. This wasn't ordinary office drama. This was someone who had deliberately sabotaged people's livelihoods, smiling to our faces while stabbing us in the back. But we also knew one thing. She was clever. She'd managed to pull this off for months without anyone catching on, which meant confronting her directly would be useless. She'd deny everything, twist it back on us, and maybe even use the confrontation itself as new gossip to spin against us. So instead, we decided to give her a taste of her own medicine. The plan was simple on the surface, but it required patience and subtlety. We knew her weakness. She couldn't resist gossip. She thrived on it. If you dangled juicy information in front of her, she'd take the bait every time. And once she thought she had a secret, she couldn't keep it to herself for long. So we invented one. The demoted colleague volunteered to be the center of it. She crafted a believable but completely false story about getting a job interview at a prestigious competitor's company. She confided in our ex-friend over coffee, asking her to keep it quiet. Of course, the rest of us were watching carefully. It didn't take long. Within a week, the story had traveled back to her manager. Suddenly, whispers about loyalty issues and jumping ship were floating around. The lie we planted had worked, and now we had proof of how the chain operated. But that was just the first step. We needed her to expose herself fully, with no way out. So we staged a second secret. This time, I was the bait. I told her in confidence that I was considering legal action against my old company for wrongful termination. I laid it on thick, said I'd already spoken to a lawyer, that I was building a case, and that I had evidence that could blow the company wide open. I knew she wouldn't be able to resist running to management with that one. And when she did, we'd be ready. We set up a way to record it, careful, discreet, but enough to capture her admitting where she'd heard the news. If she mentioned my name, or if she even implied it came from me directly, we'd have her. It was a waiting game now. But one thing was certain. The net was tightening around her, and she had no idea the people she thought were her victims were now the hunters. We didn't have to wait long. A few days after I'd confided in her about my supposed legal plans, I got a call from one of my old co-workers still inside the company. She sounded nervous, almost whispering into the phone. "Hey, I don't know what's going on, but management's been talking. They said you're planning to sue the company." Where did they even hear that? My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Thanks for telling me," I said. Inside, I was almost giddy. This was exactly what we'd been waiting for. Sure enough, 2 days later, the opportunity came. The demoted colleague invited our friend out for drinks, pretending she needed a shoulder to cry on about her career going downhill. I was there too, hidden in plain sight. And so was our other partner in this little sting. We had carefully arranged it so that the recorder picked up everything. The drinks flowed, and with each glass of wine, she grew looser, chattier, cockier. Eventually, the conversation shifted exactly where we wanted it. "You know," she said, lowering her voice dramatically, "I really shouldn't be saying this, but management is panicking about my name. She's trying to sue the company. They don't realize how dangerous that is for them. Honestly, it's probably for the best she's gone." There it was. My stomach clenched, but I stayed calm, letting her dig her own grave. The demoted colleague played her part perfectly, gasping like it was brand new information. "Really? Wow, how do you even know that?" Our friend smirked, leaning back in her chair. "She told me herself. She always trusted me. Honestly, people can be so naive when they think you're on their side." And there it was. Clear, undeniable, and recorded. The woman who had ruined our careers, who had smiled in our faces while feeding poison behind our backs, had just confessed, bragged even about it. We let the night end naturally, not wanting her to suspect anything. But the three of us left that bar buzzing with adrenaline. The mask had finally slipped, and we had caught every word. Now it wasn't just about exposing her. It was about revenge. By the next morning, the three of us were meeting in secret. We couldn't celebrate yet. This was far from over. The recordings gave us proof, yes, but we wanted something bigger. Something that would make her understand the full impact of her actions. Something unforgettable. We brainstormed for hours. Our ideas ranged from subtle humiliation to a dramatic exposure in front of the whole office. But we wanted more than embarrassment. We wanted irrevocable consequences. Finally, we hit upon a plan that was equal parts clever, daring, and poetic justice. It relied on the very thing she loved most: attention, control, and the illusion of superiority. We would create a situation that made her feel untouchable, then pull the rug out from under her in front of everyone who mattered. Here's how we executed it. The setup. The demoted colleague confided that she had discovered a confidential strategy plan for management. A fake but believable project that would supposedly make anyone who knew it look incredibly influential. We told our friend that if she helped protect the plan by keeping it secret, she'd earn major favor with management and possibly another promotion. Of course, we made sure the whole setup was being subtly observed. The bait. I played the part of the concerned employee, who accidentally hinted that the plan could leak. Our friend, unable to resist, immediately began scheming to control the situation, thinking she was outsmarting everyone. The execution. The night of the reveal, we staged a meeting with a few old colleagues, people she had wronged, the ones she had betrayed, and management's willing participants. As she strutted in, confident and smug, we guided her toward exposing her manipulation under the guise of protecting the secret plan. The revelation. With carefully timed questions, leading comments, and the recordings we had captured, she unwittingly confessed, in front of everyone, exactly how she had spread lies, poisoned reputations, and undermined careers. Every word she spoke was the perfect evidence of her deception. By the end of the meeting, she went from being untouchable to utterly exposed. Her smug confidence shattered, replaced by panic, embarrassment, and anger. She tried to deflect, tried to twist the narrative, but it was too late. The proof was overwhelming, and everyone present had seen her true colors. We watched as the woman who had destroyed so many of our careers finally faced the weight of her own actions. And in that moment, the satisfaction was intoxicating. But our plan wasn't over yet. The aftermath of the meeting was electric. Everyone in the room had witnessed her confession, and the tension was almost tangible. But we weren't content with just exposing her. We wanted her to feel the chaos she had caused, the way she made us all suffer for her own gain. Here's what we did next. Isolation. We made sure the rest of the office knew exactly what she had done, without directly attacking her ourselves. Rumors spread like wildfire. The kind she used to spread, except this time, every whisper was true and verifiable. Her colleagues began avoiding her, not out of malice, but because trust had evaporated. Professional collapse. Using the recordings, we presented undeniable evidence to HR and upper management. Every lie she had told, every rumor she had spread, was now documented. Management could no longer ignore the pattern. They immediately placed her on a probationary review, stripping her of her new promotion and sidelining her from critical projects. The ultimate psychological twist. We knew she thrived on being the insider, the one who knew everything. So we set up a small network of allies, some ex-colleagues, some friends still in the company, who fed her carefully curated misinformation. She spent weeks scrambling, trying to manipulate situations, only to realize every secret she thought she controlled was actually a trap we had laid. Every move she made was countered and mirrored, turning her cunning into panic. The final sting. Finally, we invited her to a team social event, under the guise of rebuilding office trust. There, we orchestrated a subtle but devastating exposure. A presentation highlighting team integrity and collaboration, with a few tactful slides showing examples of real workplace sabotage. Her sabotage. Her name was mentioned indirectly at first, then directly, and everyone she had wronged was there to witness it. She froze, her face pale, realizing that her reputation, which she had built over years, had collapsed in front of everyone. By the end of the night, she was left humiliated, isolated, and powerless. Every ally she thought she had was gone. Every colleague she had undermined now understood the truth. And perhaps most importantly, she finally felt the same helplessness and betrayal she had inflicted on us. It wasn't just revenge. It was poetic justice. After the final confrontation, life at work changed drastically, but not for us. For the first time in months, I felt relief, almost like I could breathe again. The office atmosphere shifted. Colleagues who had been wary of us returned to normal, and the tension that had made every day unbearable finally lifted. Meanwhile, our former friend, the one who had ruined so many careers, was left to face the consequences of her own actions. She became a cautionary tale in the office almost overnight. No one trusted her, no one sought her advice, and even her closest allies distanced themselves. The promotions she had clawed for? Gone. The control she had once wielded? Snatched away. Watching her flounder was surreal. At first, I expected satisfaction to fade quickly, but it didn't. Every time she tried to manipulate someone or gather intelligence for another scheme, it backfired spectacularly. She had become trapped in her own web, and the irony was delicious. Yet even as I felt vindicated, there was a deeper lesson unfolding. Seeing her exposed made me realize just how fragile trust can be, how much we give to those we believe are our friends, and how quickly that trust can be weaponized against us. The betrayal had hurt, deeply, but the act of reclaiming our power was liberating. By the end of it all, the office had regained a sense of normalcy, and for the first time in months, I felt genuinely proud of myself and my colleagues. We had not only survived her sabotage but had turned her own game against her in a way that she would never forget. And in the quiet moments, I realized something else. This experience had taught me more about resilience, caution, and human nature than any job or mentor ever could. By now, life had started to settle into a new rhythm. My new job was challenging, yes, but invigorating. I was appreciated, my work mattered, and I finally felt like I was building a future that wasn't threatened by backstabbing or lies. But the experience left a permanent mark. I found myself replaying the months of betrayal, trying to understand how I had been so blind. I realized that sometimes, people you think are your allies can be your greatest enemies. Not because they're overtly cruel, but because they hide their ambition behind a mask of friendship. Yet, there was also a profound sense of empowerment. I had survived the impossible, reclaimed my dignity, and with my colleagues, orchestrated a revenge that was as clever as it was satisfying. It wasn't just about punishment, it was about restoring balance. And in doing so, I learned the importance of paying attention, trusting carefully, and never underestimating the subtle ways people can influence your life. I also learned that true friendship, the kind that supports, protects, and uplifts, is rare. And when it's absent, you have to rely on yourself and the bonds you build with those who truly have your back. That realization shaped not just how I worked, but how I approached every relationship afterward. I wasn't naive anymore. But I was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to defend myself when it mattered most. Months later, I could finally look back without the sting of betrayal, or the haze of confusion clouding my thoughts. The friend who had ruined so many careers was no longer a threat. She had been stripped of her promotion, isolated from the team, and her reputation was in tatters. The office had moved on without her, and every attempt she made to regain influence was met with polite distance or outright refusal. It was poetic justice. The consequences of her actions were inescapable. For me, the journey had been equally transformative. I had learned the hard way who could be trusted, how quickly appearances could deceive, and the strength that comes from standing up, even when the odds are stacked against you. My new role was everything I needed: challenging, respected, and rewarding. I was finally in an environment where merit mattered, and my efforts were recognized without fear of sabotage. Looking back, I realized that betrayal, as painful as it is, can sometimes illuminate the path forward. It forces you to grow, to evaluate relationships, and to protect your own boundaries. And revenge, when executed with patience, cleverness, and integrity, can be a powerful tool for reclaiming control. I don't dwell on the past anymore. Instead, I focus on the present and the future, and on surrounding myself with people who genuinely support one another. But I'll never forget the lessons I learned. Trust carefully, act strategically, and never let anyone make you doubt your worth. And as for her, let's just say she's learned exactly what it feels like to be powerless, and that, in the end, was the most satisfying lesson of all.